Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we've got Jeff Rutt with us. Say hello to the people, Jeff.
Hello to the people.
And we have a very special guest, Thomas Talbott, who's a financial advisor with Stewardship Advisors. And welcome to the program, Thomas.
Oh, thanks so much for allowing me to join you. I count it a real honor.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Jeff Rutt, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, Thomas, this is a real privilege. Tell us a little bit about the Talbott household. What was it like growing up in the Talbott household? Maybe talk about spiritual formation, talk about any kind of entrepreneurial activities. Maybe give us, some color of what those years were like.
Sure. Well, I have to be honest and say I had a drug problem when I was a kid. And unfortunately or fortunately, it had some lasting consequences. Every time the church doors were open, I was drugged there. So it was Sunday school, it was Sunday morning, it was youth group, it was Sunday night, it was Wednesday night, it was any kind of youth activities, it was summer camp, it was vacation Bible school. And I say it had lasting consequences because it did give me a good, solid biblical foundation and helped me develop a good Christian worldview. It allowed me to understand a lot about the Bible. And to this day, I have a lot of verses in my mind that I've memorized during that period of time. So I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in Arlington, Virginia. I was really a country boy at heart. My mom was Pennsylvania Dutch from up here in Pennsylvania. And one thing about the Pennsylvania Dutch is that they know how to work. And my parents taught me to work. So when I was young, I had a paper out, I mowed lawns, I sold Krispy Kreme donuts for the Boy Scouts. I shoveled snow in the wintertime. And so I really thank God for the work ethic that was instilled in me as a child. My parents were also givers. And so when I earned money, not only was I encouraged to save it, but even at a young age, learning to give it to worthy causes and help advance God's kingdom. Mm-hmm. When I went to a Christian school and when I graduated in ninth grade, there were 12 in my high school in the ninth grade graduating class. And then I went to the public high school where there were over 500. And I was really a late bloomer. I was a small kid. And a school of that size, they could draw talent for sports, for drama. So my claim to fame in high school was I was part of the Bible club and had a paper out. And even when I went off to college, I followed my brother's footsteps in going to the same college that he did. He was a senior at the time and I was a freshman. We decided to room together. I looked like I was 15 and the kids on the floor, the guys on the floor thought I was just helping my brother move in. And lo and behold, I actually stayed there.
How many siblings do you have, Thomas?
I have an older brother and a younger sister.
Okay. And then what did you study in college?
I majored in biology and chemistry, which is really necessary for my career today.
Did you
tongue in cheek?
Did you get a job in the sciences, or what was the first job out of school?
Well, I would have liked to, but I graduated in the early 80s. And if you remember the late Carter years, it was like nobody was hiring at all. And I put my resume in because I wanted to get into lab work or research. My dad was diagnosed with leukemia when I was 9 years old. And I remember telling him that I wanted to discover a cure for cancer someday. And with my interest in math and science, I pursued that in college and could not find a job at all in that field.
So where did you land?
Well, I have had a rather eclectic background of doing all kinds of things. Shortly after college, I married a wonderful woman that I had met during a summer missions program between my sophomore and junior year. We met up in Alaska, and after we got married and were married for 6 months, went back up to Alaska and spent the first year up there. And that's where my oldest daughter was born.
Wow. And now you've got how many daughters?
I have 5 daughters. My wife and I had 4 together, and we thought we were done. And then after 11 years, we went over to China and adopted a little girl. I'll probably reference some of this later, but when our girls found out about the plight of girls in China, because it was during the era of the one-child policy, they, were like, well, why don't you bring back 4 or 5? We can each take care of one. And we had to convince them, no, this was not like getting a puppy. This is this is a daughter that's going to be with us. So we've got a lovely Chinese daughter rounding out our 5 girls.
So
Well,
Tom, tell us a little bit about, as you talk about the 5 daughters, dive into, we like to unpack family. How do we encourage our families to get involved in generosity? Talk about some of the activities. First of all, what instrument did each of your daughters play? And then talk about how you involve them in different forms of generosity.
So all of our girls do play the violin. We, as part of our philosophy in raising the girls, we decided that each one had to develop a discipline, and it could be music or a number of other things, but they liked music, and obviously music does a lot for the brain and helping with the various types of from an educational standpoint. And so they're
really good at it, I might add. They're really good, Jeff. You got to hear them.
Thank you. I say they have all my talent. I didn't need any of it, so I just passed it all right on to them. So they would see my wife and I, give money or be generous in other ways. And so we really tried to involve our girls in giving. So one of the things that we would do around Christmas time is make a bunch of apple pies and take them to our neighbors. Our girls each would sponsor a compassion child. And then during one of our family vacations, we were actually out in Colorado Springs and saw the compassion headquarters. And it was really neat for them to see just the huge operation that they have and the impact that letters have on them. But we really wanted them to also see that the rest of the world doesn't live like we do. And so we had taken them over to Ukraine and did an English camp. I had the privilege of biking coast to coast with 4 of our daughters. So we were raising awareness and funds for a national Christian organization, but it was also really neat for a dad to spend 8 weeks with his daughters just talking about life. They would ask me about how I met mom and some of my growing up years. So it was really neat, and we have wonderful stories that we reference to this day on that.
Mm-hmm.
How old were they when you did that? Tell us more about that trip. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
So they were 13, 17, 19, and 21.
Wow.
So we took 2 tandems and a solo bike. We were self-supportive. I had jerseys made and silk screened. So we kind of stood out, and people would pull up next to us and roll down their window and say, where are you going? Where did you come from? And so when we were in Iowa, we would say, oh, we're headed to New Jersey. And they'd kind of look and go, New Jersey. And they'd say, oh, that's pretty far. And we'd say, well, you have no idea where we've been. So
Right.
anyways, just part of the fun of a cross-country trip with your daughters.
Yeah.
In tandem, I mean, seriously, if your relationship's good, it's going to get better. If it's bad, it's going to get worse on a tandem bike. I'm going to go ahead and throw that. Is that fair?
Well, it was actually really neat because my one daughter, who is a very good musician, she rode on the back. And it was neat because she didn't have to worry about balance or anything. She could just turn and videotape and take pictures. And tandems really leveled the playing field.
Okay,
and so, this was not like Ram Race Across America. This was just a neat bike ride that we were able to do. It was on my bucket list, and I had told the girls early on, all families do this. We just got to figure out what the best time is.
Yeah. Well, if you have a chance to share anything more related to that, a link or photos or video or whatever, we'll put it in the show notes. How old were the girls when you went to Ukraine? That was through Tomorrow Clubs, and you were doing an English teaching Bible camp. So the girls would get to share about Jesus in English while the Ukrainian kids were, and some of those kids are I'm sure adults. What year was that?
That was 2011. And my daughter at that point was 10 years old, our Chinese daughter. And so she played the violin very well at that point. And I can still remember her putting the bow between her knees, turning the violin upside down and playing a song that way. And the kids were amazed. So it was neat that our kids were able to resonate with their kids.
Yeah, when some of those kids just, shout out to Tomorrow Clubs, but that was, you said 2010, did you say, or 2008?
2011.
2011. So, whatever, 13 years ago. And now today, look at, the some of those adults, what they're going through right now. And you planted some seeds, and God watered them. And who knows where those folks are today, but thank you for that. And your girls got to see and be a part of ministry in a place that was a lot different than home, right?
Yes. And I think it helped instill in them that sense of giving. But obviously back then, and they could not give at some higher levels. So two other things that we had done. One is I remember one Thanksgiving years ago giving $100 to each of my daughters and son-in-laws and telling them, I gave it to them at Thanksgiving and told them they had to give it away before Christmas. And we're going to get back together at Christmas and hear some of the stories. Because that's the other thing about generosity. Yes, we can give to ministries. Yes, we can be involved in advancing God's kingdom. But we live in a broken world. We are all broken. And sometimes giving and generosity is just to people that have needs. And, you don't get a tax deduction for it. I mean, we should never let the tax tail wag the charitable dog anyways. But it was just really neat hearing some of those stories of the $100, how they were given. Another time, my wife and I, we have a donor advised fund, and I'm a huge proponent of donor advised funds. And so we decided to take $5,000 out of our donor advised fund and tell each of our girls that we were going to give it to a ministry of their choosing. They had to petition my wife and me as if we were a foundation. And so it caused them to really do some research because they wanted to, quote unquote, win this $5,000 to give to their ministry. Mm-hmm. And so they, some of them had put together PowerPoints using statistics and all. And so my wife and I were just delighted to see the depth that they went into. And it was really neat because Jeff, referencing the English camp, even our youngest daughter, our Chinese daughter, she was in her preteen years at that point. She even put together a presentation because she was so impacted by the English camp and what was going on over in Ukraine that she wanted to continue that. So we listened. We ended up giving $1,000 to each of the 5 organizations. But I think it really helped them realize that
Yeah.
even though they don't have the money, they need to be good stewards of their giving and make sure that their giving is going to worthwhile causes.
Amen. Yeah, that's really important. That's a great example for listeners to tap into some form of that as you involve your family.
I think you might be onto something with the competition.
Yeah.
You know, Thomas, we're in the same business. So like when we talk to clients, a lot of times they're very concerned about how to get the next generation or next generations involved. And I know we've had a lot of conversations on this podcast. You know, Jeff Rutten talks a lot about, taking grandkids on mission trips with you, exposing them to these things. But I find sometimes that clients struggle with this. Sometimes they have grown children where the parents are maybe generation 1 that made the money. They're trying to get their kids involved and they're not that interested. Why do you think your girls were interested? Was it these previous trips they had been on? What do you sort of attribute their interest? Because to have all of them do a presentation, I could see 1 or 2 of them going, you know what? I'll let my sister do it. You know, why do you think they were all involved?
That's a great question. And I don't know that I can point it to any one thing.
Yeah.
I would say it's a number of things. And I'm referenced earlier, I am married to a wonderful woman. And I think that the apples for our girls don't fall far from the tree. And so they've seen various characteristics in my wife. They know the needs that are out there.
Yeah.
I think they know that money, and certainly money at that level, could have more of an impact than a $25 or $100 gift could. So I think it was a cumulative effect, even starting way back. And even now that we have grandchildren, because the 4 older girls are all married, I have 4 wonderful son-in-laws. We've got 12 grandchildren, and it's important, that I build into them and try to light that fire of what the joy of giving is. I mean, let's face it, God owns it all. And he not only has all strength and power, but he also has all resources. And we certainly can't have this scarcity mindset, that there's this pie that just gets divvied up. No, we have an abundant God. And, he really doesn't need our money. But when we give back to him as a reflection of our deep understanding that God owns it all, and we're not relying on what he's entrusted to us, but we're relying on him, then we can, have this joy, and he allows us to share in that joy. And I think as our girls have tasted that, that helps foster that giving attitude in them.
So while we're on this sort of, sort of biblical view of giving, I know you've written an article, we'll put it in the show notes, about how does one go about figuring out where to give? I think that's a common question people have, and so why don't you just unpack for us your thoughts on that?
Well, I remember sitting down with a client, and this is an older lady, and she says she has what she has because of dumb luck. But she has money, and she doesn't have any children. And so she just loves giving. And so I asked her one time the question, where do you give, or how do you give? And she very quickly said about the Matthew 25 passage where Christ is separating the sheep and the goats. And, you know, he says to the sheep, you know, I was naked and thirsty and sick and in prison, and you did all these things to care for me. And of course, they said, when did we do this? And he said, if you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. And so she came up with 5 organizations, a rescue mission, a prison ministry, her church, a Christian medical mission that addressed each of those areas. And I just love her philosophy of giving. And it kind of set me on this quest to know what other clients do. So I asked another client, you know, how do you give? And he goes, oh, I give everything to the church because he loves his church. He likes the leadership and the decisions they've made. And so he trusts them to disperse the funds into different areas. I asked another client, and she very quickly said she's come up with this 3x3 matrix, which forms obviously 9 call it window panes. And so on the rows, she believes she wants to give money towards evangelism, discipleship, and care of the poor. And then if you look at the columns, it's local, it's domestic, and it's global. So she has an organization in each of those 9 different blocks that addresses those issues. And so she feels very good about that because there's biblical principles for local giving and global giving. There's biblical examples of discipleship and evangelism, and certainly helping the poor. And so that's her grid. For my wife and I, you know, we kind of have this giving pyramid where we have a couple of organizations at the top that we give funds to. We are invested in their work. It addresses the passion that we have in our heart. You know, then there's a second tier where we're going to give because, as I referenced earlier, we live in a broken world, and God has given us money to help alleviate the suffering, to help educate the next generation, to do other aspects. And then the bottom tier is various needs that may pop up. You know, it's Susie going on her missions trip, and we want to encourage that, but it's not a long-term commitment. It is not as deep a commitment as that higher tier is.
How does your own experience or your own passions, like often we'll ask people like, what breaks your heart, to get them thinking about those passion points? How does that play into maybe a pyramid or a matrix or this decision making for you or for your clients?
It does grieve us to see America slide, throwing God out of the system, and all the results that happen as a result of that. And so we are trying to kind of address the issue on both ends of the equation, or both sides of the equation, both ends of the spectrum, I guess I should say. One is, yes, we do enjoy supporting a rescue mission. But on the other hand, we also support organizations that are trying to stem the tide on evil that seems to be pervasive. You know, you'd almost get the idea that we are wrestling not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. You know, that there's this force that is in throwing God out of the system is just causing havoc. And so we want to push against that.
Have you seen clients, can you think of a story maybe with a client who experienced something where that influenced their giving, you know, how that affected them?
I know that various clients, they are high givers. They are very involved in the various um, uh, missions, charities, their church, other organizations. They are looking to me to help them to leverage that giving as much as possible. I think it's important to remember that cash is the most expensive way to give because you just can't leverage that. And so, unfortunately, I can't think of a story right now of where they up their giving. I know various clients go on mission trips, but that's because they're involved in the ministries already.
Yeah. So why don't you talk about the cash thing? That's something we've all talked about. One of the genesis of this podcast was that Alan Barnhart, Jeff Rutt, and I have all given a piece of our operating businesses to foundation, and very few people do that. But maybe talk about why you mentioned cash is not the right asset.
Well, because when you give cash, you, as I said, can't leverage it. So let me contrast that with giving an appreciated asset. It could be actual physical ground. It could be a stock, and or in exchange traded funds. Most of the clients are looking to do just that. So as an investment grows, if you've held it for more than 1 year and you donate that, then you get the fair market value of, the donation is the fair market value of that asset. So by giving that, not only do you get the charitable deduction of that, but then you don't have to pay any of the capital gains of that. So when you just give cash, you can't do that. Matter of fact, when they raise the standard deduction the way that they have, most people can't even itemize their charitable deductions unless they're giving large amount. So oftentimes, as I'm talking to various charities and tell them, if you get a large check, you should probably give that back. And people look at me like, why? And I'm like, because if somebody's giving a large check, they probably have assets that they could give. And I am just convinced that, a lot of ministries are crawling around on the floor eating crumbs when there's a sumptuous feast on the table up above. But if those charities are only looking at getting the cash gifts, then they're missing out on the large assets that people oftentimes don't know how to give. But when they do, their giving can really go up to the next level.
And so I think part of the way we always talk about that kind of in our community around Kingdom Advisors is a very small portion of people's balance sheet is the cash, where most of the assets on the balance sheet are the illiquid things, if you will, or even in stocks and bonds that are liquid, but not cash. 98% of the assets are not. So maybe looking deeper in the balance sheet, right?
Sure.
So now I think let's just come back to one area, because I think these 5 girls of yours is a very unique story, and now 4 of them are married. And I know this is a question near and dear to Jeff Rutt's heart, and we all have grandchildren on here, so we're all thinking about these things. So how does it look for your girls now to kind of take ownership of teaching their kids about generosity? Of course, you have some influence, but not as direct as it was perhaps as having your own children. What does this sort of look like? No one's got this all figured out, so we don't expect you to have this figured out. But how do you just sort of think about having this sort of culture of giving in your family? You've done such a nice job with your girls, pervading the next generation. How do you think about that?
I think 2 things come to mind. One is the donor advised fund, and I know some of my girls have their own donor advised funds and are funding them through appreciated assets or other means, and so encouraging them to have their own children. Actually, let's start that over because I don't want to divulge that information. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the how the
Yeah.
grandkid, how you influence the grandkids or something like that?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Let's do that.
So I think one of the things that we can do is um, look at one of those catalogs that we get from those organizations
Oh, that's a good
that
idea.
are dealing with folks overseas, and have our grandkids, buy, 3 pigs or 5
Exactly.
chickens or a steer, for people over there to be able to continue to feed themselves, so to speak. And I think that's a great way. I know that one of my clients does that each year with her grandchildren. They sit down, and I think they're gotten so used to, buying these various animals for those overseas that they, when they get to the place that they are earning an income, they can just go ahead and do that. So one of the things that we can do is help them not just give away, their $1 or $2, or when my wife and I pay them, to help us with a chore around the house, and if we give them $10, give them 10 ones and say, now, instilling the principle or talking about the principle of the tithe or something like that. But if we're giving at a higher level or encouraging them to give, I think it'll help, as I said, instill those principles for them when they're older.
That's really just a neat little simple way to do it. Kids
Mhm.
often love animals. Make it simple for them. They like shopping. Let's shop for somebody else with something they love. That's just such a neat little thing. Well, one of the things, Thomas, as you know, in the podcast that we try to do is leave people with an actionable idea, a little something they can do. I think really this is sort of your gift is working with your own family on generosity and then with others. So what's just some practical tips, some little thing that somebody kind of behind you on the journey could start to use with their family? Just one little practical tip for somebody behind you on the journey. What might that be?
I'm going to deal with some of the non-cash gifts that our girls have actually seen. And let's talk about panhandlers. I swear the panhandlers all get their signs from the same place. Their exact same cardboard shape, fonts exactly the same, and I'm going, is this guy just trying to rip me off or what? And I think, okay, the feeding of the 5,000, I'm sure some people were there just for, fish and chips or, okay, fish and bread. But when it comes to the panhandlers, it's like, what do I do? And so I got this idea from one of my daughters, and that is socks. So I go to Walmart and I buy a 12-pack thing of socks, large size, and I keep a couple in my glove box. And so when I see the panhandler, I want to give him something, but I don't feel I can give him cash or gift cards. So I've given socks out, and it is amazing the reaction I get. Oh, this is the best that I've gotten all day. So that's one thing. One of the things that the girls saw when we were biking across the country is we stopped at restaurants. And sometimes I would see like an older lady across the restaurant eating by herself. So I'd ask the waitress to get the bill from her. And I would write on the back of the bill, God has blessed us so much, and we just want to bless you too, and sign it the Phantom. And then give it to them and have the waitress, hand that to her, the lady, as if it's her bill. And I said, okay, girls, don't make eye contact. We don't want them to know who did it. So and the whole thing of tipping at a restaurant. Goodness sakes, we've been given the most. I mean, I think of Michael Sweet's song, that rocker from years ago. All this in heaven too. That's what we have. So if we've been given the most, we need to be the most generous people of all. So I'm in a guys group, and there's one guy in the group who doesn't just tip nicely. He just doesn't tip the bill. He usually tips 2 times the bill. And it has really fostered this idea of tipping among the other guys there. And so I, hate to hear, Christians being stingy with their tip. Gosh, they should be tipping 25, 30, 25% minimum, 30, 40%, because especially if they see you praying, I mean, you got to follow through on that. So I also love giving out Chick-fil-A gift cards. So my tip for everybody there is just make giving a lifestyle. And yes, you want to help advance God's kingdoms through funding various charities, but it's also just neat to do these kind of small one-off things to enrich people's lives.
I really think, especially coming from you, a financial guy who's got kind of this scientific mind, and you could very easily be driven by the tax law, and I think the fact that you gave those sort of everyday, practical, frankly non-deductible from a DAF deals is super unique. Socks, lunch, tips, and just little gift cards that in your everyday. What came to my mind was the phrase heart position. I really like your sort of everyday having that heart position to just do little things along the way that create that muscle. I really think it's just been a gift for you to share these stories with us today. So thanks so much, Thomas, for being with us.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's probably no surprise to anyone who's listening or knows you, Thomas, that your daughters picked that up from you. The book Sticky Faith comes to mind. There's a lot more caught than taught, and they grew up with it, and it's a lifestyle for you of generosity. So really appreciate you sharing your story.
Well, thanks. I'm pleased to be here and be able to share this. Giving is a passion of mine, and I just love helping other people catch that vision.
Well, thanks again. And thanks everybody for tuning in to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Share it with a friend, and we'll see you next week.